in trying to help the patient, they are putting forward measures that do feel very warlike, that are closing off a lot of doors, that are making energy more expensive, that are going to disproportionately impact the poor, not just here in the US, but around the world. And so that top-down control, I know better, I know what to do with this knob. Instead of letting it evolve or happen in the free market, we're going to prescribe behavior. And that now, I would say, and I'd love to know if you agree, is, if not the biggest, certainly one of the biggest contributors to what's happening to the economy.
Yeah, good. The road to hell is paved in good intent, right? People get into positions of power and they want to do good. And so they do good by issuing edicts, executive orders, policies, regulations, and they think that the regulations will make things better. They believe that if you enter into government and politics, you believe the political process is a way to make the world better. So what you have is political organizations, centralized organizations, getting progressively more powerful. And as they get more powerful, people do things, right? And I think if you roll the clock back to Ronald Reagan, he would say, government's the problem, government's not the solution. So let's take nuclear energy, right? The cleanest form of energy is nuclear energy. It's the cleanest, probably the safest. Nobody died at 3 Mile Island. We can't hardly trace a death from nuclear energy in the U.S. And yet we haven't built a nuclear power plant since the creation of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission 50 years ago. And in Germany, they shut all theirs down. Right. And in Japan,
they shut all human psychology at play. Like, this feels another key piece to the puzzle here as we look at why the collapse, how this happens, how we get back out. Feels like humans react in a very emotional way to what happens. So
fear.
Yeah, exactly. And
terror.
Euphoria. So you get these two competing things that set something up weird. So this is the first cycle that I've lived through where I was paying attention like somebody interested in the financial world. Till then, I was just an entrepreneur and just totally focused on that. And so I watched the euphoria grow in crypto, and it was like exciting and thrilling, and it was so fun. But there were people, like I had heard you say a gazillion times, guys, you have to be thinking in at least 4-year increments. And any thinking less than that is you're going to get tricked by the volatility. And despite the fact that you and many other people were saying similar things, the second the price starts dropping, people panic, the price starts dropping more, people get liquidated because they were in way over their heads. And now it's the sense of despair, and it's never coming back, and it's over forever. And so there's like this schizophrenic, bipolar, maybe is a better way to think of it, attitude of like, we're up and we could never lose, and I don't need to plan for a down scenario. We're down and we'll never be up again. And how much of that do you think exacerbates the problem?
If you're an entrepreneur or you're an investor, you have to have a 10-year time horizon, and nothing great is accomplished without a decade. If you look at Microsoft, the company's founded in the mid-70s, a decade later in their mid-80s. If you're not willing to hold Microsoft stock for a decade, you probably didn't get to the point where they came public. So a decade's a short period of time for someone who's an industrialist or an investor. I mean, Warren Buffett still owns Coca-Cola stock, and he must have bought it 50 years ago, right? So I think that anybody that's a billionaire, right? All of these names, the Sergey Brins, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musks of the world, they didn't get there without holding an asset that had technical potential for a decade or longer. There's no get rich quick scheme. So I think that people want an easy route. If you're trying to get a quick win with no volatility, with no risk, doesn't make sense. And if you're actually trying to be successful in a hurry with volatility, that probably still won't work either. I mean, ultimately, success comes from taking a decade-long view, right? Andrew Mellon, John D. Rockefeller, Jeff Bezos, right? We forget, like, Tesla was founded 20 years ago. Like, people think it's an overnight success, but it's not an overnight success. And with regard to the macro picture, we live in a time of unprecedented public intervention in the affairs of the economy, right? Unprecedented. We never in the history of the country did you have a government that told you couldn't have Thanksgiving dinner with your family because they didn't want family members to sit too close to each other. Yeah. We arrested a dude on a surfboard in the middle of the Pacific Ocean for basically paddle boarding in the middle of the Pacific because that was deemed as unsafe, right? That kind of stuff. So we have an unprecedented amount of encroachment. We have politicians overriding the free market. They tell you what kind of energy you can use. They tell you, how far you have to sit from someone. They tell you whether it's safe to be sitting in your office at a table next to someone. Lots and lots of encroachment. Each of these areas, right? War is the suppression of the free market to the benefit of the public or the public organization, right? The government is suppressing the free market. So if the government keeps suppressing the free market everywhere, what you do is you cripple production, right? Yeah, that's what we have tariffs on Chinese imports, right? That drive up prices up or down, drives them up, right? You have a war or a labor war, right? If everybody unionizes and if everybody's afraid to go to work, and if everybody thinks that their life is threatened to stand next to another human being, right? And if we're afraid to trade with each other, and if we're afraid to talk with each other, right? If you have capital controls, wage controls, price controls, export controls, manufacturing controls, right? As those things happen, they have a chilling effect on the economy. So what we have right now is, on one hand, you have a supply side problem, right? We're not producing as much. The degree of not producing, by the way, is misunderstood. The currency weakened by 20% in the year after COVID. If the economy measured in nominal terms is flat, that meant that the overall economic output decreased by 20%. The overall economic output decreased by 20% or more in the last 2 years. People wonder if we're in a recession. We've been in recession since March of 2020. But what we have is a situation where all the metrics are distorted, right? For example, how many people would measure the economy based upon GDP output measured in dollars? Most. Is that the correct measure? No, right? Because the dollar is not worth what it was 24 months ago, right?
What if would you look at it?
You have to measure it in real terms, or measure it in the actual output of goods and services. For example, how many airline miles got flown, right? If Emirates Airlines grounded half their fleet and decommissioned it after COVID, now they're up and running the part they didn't decommission. How is it possible that the air sector could possibly recover to the point where it was in January of 2020? If you've actually mothballed or decommissioned half the airplanes, right? I could double the price of a ticket. If I double the price of a ticket, I can tell you that the size of the airline industry is the same as it was in January 2020, right? I could declare there's no recession. But the fact is, everything costs twice as much. There's half as much of it, right? I changed the way that I measured it. GDP measured in nominal terms is a gross distortion, and then CPI is a gross distortion. If I have 100 things that you want, and I pick 10 of them, and I measure the increase in the price of 10, and I ignore the price in the other 90, I can show you a CPI is 8%, right? 8.3% is the number this morning. But the actual inflation rate is higher, but it's inflation on something. It's inflation on something you want, but I'm not going to choose to measure. For example, the 30-year bond is.
In today's thriving workplace,